Hello everyone. In the first section of our course, we need to understand the very basics of Agile, which are the Agile 4 values. So in 2001, a group of software managers and owners of companies gathered together in order to think of ways to make software development better. In this gathering, they produced the Agile 4 values and the Agile 12 principles. We will begin by the Agile 4 values. The first value says individuals and interactions over processes and tools. This value means that the relationship between our team members is more important than the process or the tool that we are using. So for example, if we have two developers inside our team and they need to communicate to each other about some information, it is not very important what is the way they will use in order to give or deliver this information to each other. The more important thing is that they have good relationship between each other and that the information is delivered from one of them to the other in a simple way. Like you will notice, the Agile 4 values favor something over another thing. So the second value says working software over comprehensive documentation. In many projects in sequential life cycles like waterfall or V model, you might notice that you will have a lot of documents. We begin the software or the project by writing the SRS or the user requirements. We might create sequence diagrams, UML diagrams, or any other diagrams that will help us in developing the software. Agile says comprehensive documentation is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that you have a working software. So it is not very important to document everything about the login functionality. The more important is that you have a login functionality inside your application and it is working. This doesn't mean that we will not have any type of documentation. Documentation is still important, but working software should have more time than writing documents in our project plan, and it has a higher priority. Next, we have customer collaboration over contract negotiation. In any project, we create a contract at the beginning of the project. What if the customer comes in the middle of the project and says, okay, I need to make some adjustments to the project? We will not say, no, this is not possible, because we have a contract and you signed this contract, you cannot change anything. The good thing is to have some type of collaboration with the customer. This doesn't mean that we will build the whole project again from scratch, but we will collaborate with the customer in order to give him a product with the highest quality possible, a product that meets the user expectations and that will give the customer a high revenue. The last principle says responding to change over following a plan. In any project we have a plan, and the plan is important. You might hear in management they say stick to the plan, but in Agile we say don't stick to the plan. If there are changes in the software or in the project, you can change the plan, you can respond to change. For example, you choose a tool or a platform for managing your team, and after 1 week or 2 weeks you noticed that this tool is not good or this platform is not good. In this case, you should change it even if it is stated in the plan. Do the correct thing for your team. So like we see here, we have 4 Agile values: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. Like he says here, the Agile Manifesto argues that although the concepts on the right have value, those on the left have greater value. So all those 8 things have value, but we are favoring, okay, if there is a contradiction between the plan and the change, we should respond to change. If there is a contradiction between the contract and the collaboration with the customer, we should collaborate with the customer. But this doesn't mean that we will not have contracts or that we will not have documentation, or that we will not have process and tools, or that we don't have a plan. No, we will have all of these things, but the things on the left are more important. Now we will talk about the Agile 12 principles, and those principles are based on the 4 values that we talked about in previous video. The first principle says our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So like they say, the customer is always right. Our highest priority is to satisfy this customer. How will we satisfy the customer? By delivering him software, valuable software, early and continuous. How will we do this? Using many methods like Scrum, for example, which will be explained later. But now we need just to understand that satisfying the customer is very important, and this will be done by continuous and early delivery. The second principle says deliver working software frequently at intervals of between a few weeks to a few months, with a preference to the shorter time scale. So we need to satisfy the customer, like we said in the previous principle. We will do this by delivering the customer working software frequently. Each week, each 2 weeks, each 4 weeks, we will deliver the customer a working software, and we will get feedback from him about its quality. It is better to have shorter time frames, like he says here. For example, you have an iteration or a sprint of 1 week. But if you are new to Agile, if your team is just trying to apply Agile methodologies in your company, in this case, it is better to begin with longer iterations, for example, 1 month. The third principle says working software is the primary measure of progress. The progress of our team is measured by delivering working software. It is not measured by writing comprehensive documentation. It is not measured by creating many daily stand-up meetings or any type of meeting in which we communicate with each other in a good way. It is measured by having a working software. And this is based on the value, which is working software over comprehensive documentation. The next principle says welcome changing requirements. Development teams most of the time think of changing requirements as a bad thing, but we in Agile, we use it for our advantage. So welcome changing requirements even late in development. Why? Because we use the change for the customer's competitive advantage. Our customer has many competitors in the market, and they are changing their strategies and their plans. This is why our customer also needs to change his plans and strategies. Our goal as a team is to help our customer in satisfying his needs, in having a competitive advantage. The next principle says continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. In order to be agile, in order to move fast and easy, everything should be organized in a good way. How can you do this? By continuous attention to technical excellence and good design. This is why in Agile we have many methodologies that talk about writing good code, writing high quality code. Why? Because in order to be able to respond to change easily, you must have everything designed in a good way. Your code must be scalable, it must be maintainable, it must have comments written inside it. This is why technical excellence is important. The next principle says Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. So in many teams, like in Waterfall for example, in many teams that use sequential models, you might find the team having a high productivity in some weeks, and in other weeks they are having very bad productivity. This is not the case in Agile. Like we see here, we must have a constant pace. So our progress should be constant. In each week, for example, we are delivering some piece of software. In the next week, we should deliver a similar size of software. In the next week, we should deliver another piece of software, and so on, with a constant pace. Then we have simplicity, and this is my favorite principle. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. This principle says Anything that will not add value to your project, don't do it. So for example, someone might tell you writing a very detailed SRS is very important, but you tried it in your project and you found that it is consuming a lot of time and it is not that important. In this case, don't write SRS. Okay, you might use wireframes or any other way of documentation. The same with functionalities. For example, you might find a chatting functionality inside your application. The customer didn't ask for it, but you can do it easily. Is this functionality important? If the answer is no, so do not develop it. Why? Because like we see here, maximize the amount of work not done. Anything that you are able to cancel, just cancel it. This will make your team focus on the most important functionalities. The next principle says, build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. So Agile doesn't like micromanagement. In micromanagement, the manager or the team leader is doing everything. He is involved in every task of the team. This is not the way Agile teams work. In Agile teams, the whole team must believe in Agile principles. The whole team must believe in the idea of the project and they must be motivated to get the job done. If the Agile team has those traits, in this case, you should trust them to get the job done. The team manages itself. They don't wait for the manager to manage them. The next principle says the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. So like we said, it is better for the team to self-organize itself. It is better for the team to be self-organized. The manager shouldn't be involved in everything. Each team member assigns his tasks to himself and also adds estimates to them, then begin working on them. The next principle says business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. So the business people, like the product owner, we will explain his role later, or the customer, should work closely with the developers. In this case, they will have the same vision about the software. In this case, we will be certain that what we are developing is the best solution for our business. The next principle says the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. So nowadays, for example, in COVID-19, most of us tried working from home, and most of meetings are held using tools like Zoom or any other tool like Microsoft Teams, for example. This method of communication is not effective. The best way is to have face-to-face conversation. So if you have a team member and he is sitting with you in the same room, do not send him an email. Do not send him a document or a report. Just talk with him. This is why we have something that's called daily stand-up meeting or pair programming, which we will explain later. The last principle says at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. So our Agile team must evaluate itself. This evaluation is very helpful in increasing something that's called the team velocity. So the Agile team must always look forward to performing in a better way. We have a meeting that's called a retrospective meeting. We have another meeting that's called a sprint review. All of those meetings are held in order to achieve this goal. The third thing that we need to talk about in Agile is the user requirements. And the user requirements in Agile are written in a form that's called a user story. So what is the user story? And how do we write it? The user story is a requirement, and like we see here, he says that user stories are written to capture requirements from the perspectives of developers, testers, and business representatives. The user stories must address both functional and non-functional characteristics. So we need to understand how do we write the user story. If we open Google and write user story example, let's open images. So like you see here, this is the user story. The user story is written in the form of, as a person, I want some functionality so that I can reach a goal. And for each user story, we write something that's called acceptance criteria. The acceptance criteria are the things that when done, we can say that this user story is done. We have implemented this user story. So like we see here also, as a persona, I want to do something so that I can realize a reward. So let's see an example of a user story. This is just a template, so we can say login. So here, like we see, for example, we have this application. We have a mobile user who registers, logins, and goes to his account. And we have a web user who registers to the application. So here, for the registration, we can say as a user, I can register for the application by entering my email, password, and confirming my password. As a user, I will receive a confirmation email once I have registered for the application. As a user, I can register the application through Facebook, and I can upload a photo and add my name to my account. So this is the registration. For the login, for example, we have login by email and password, login with Facebook, and resetting the password. For the account, I can view my account information, I can edit my photo, and I can edit my email, and I can log out. Like we see here, as a user, I can view my personal information. He didn't say so that I can get something. So this is not a must. You don't have to write the user story in this form. As a user, I want something so that I get another thing. The important goal is to capture the requirements of the user in a good way that the whole development team can understand. So let's see another example. Here he says we have a title, the customer inter-account transfers. The customer wants to transfer money between his accounts. This is the user story. As a bank customer, I want to transfer funds between my linked accounts so that I can fund my credit card. And here are the acceptance criteria. This is acceptance criterion 1 and acceptance criterion 2. So the acceptance criteria can be written in this form. Given, when, then. Given some state, when the user does some actions, then the system will respond with a specific response. So here, given the account has sufficient funds, when the customer requests an inter-account transfer, then ensure the source account is debited and the target account is credited. Another acceptance criterion, given that the account is overdrawn, if the customer doesn't have enough balance, when the customer requests an inter-account transfer, we will ensure the rejection message is displayed and ensure that the money is not transferred. Here we have something that's called definition of done. We will talk about it later. So those are some other things that must be done before we say that this user story is done. For example, here, all unit tests must be passed, the acceptance criteria are met, the code is reviewed, the functional testing has passed, and the non-functional requirements have been met. And we also met the non-functional requirements, and also the product owner must accept the user story. We didn't talk yet about who is the product owner. Also, we have an estimate, 5 points. What are those points? We will talk about them later. So this is an example of a user story. In the next video, we will use a tool in order to see how we write a user story using this tool. Throughout our course, we will explain many theoretical concepts in Agile. In order to understand those concepts in a better way, after each concept, we will begin to apply this concept using a tool. The most famous tool around the world in Agile methodologies is called Jira. So in this video, we will have an overview of Jira and begin to write a user story using it in order to understand writing user stories in a better way. So if I open Google and I write Jira, so like you see, here we have Jira issue and project tracking software. Let's open it. So we are redirected to Atlassian.com, which is the company who created Jira, /software/Jira. So let's click on get it free. So now we have selected Jira software, project and issue tracking. We don't need Confluence or Jira service management now. So let's scroll and click next. So here we are redirected to get started page, free for up to 10 users. So if you have a small team, you can use Jira for free. If you have a large team or if you need another functionalities, you need to pay for the tool. So here I will click on sign up with email. I need a disposable email, so I will open Google and write disposable email. I can use any website from them. I'm not a robot, of course. Okay, let's click on Chimneys, verify, and get the email. So this is my email. I will copy it and add it here. Then the password, let's say 12345678. Then first name new, last name tester, and click on agree. Tractors, okay, verify. So now I need to verify my email. I have received an email here. Let's open it. And then I can start working on Jira. So now I'm going to create a name to my website. And this website can be accessed by any team member of my team. He can write the URL of it, the name of the website .atlassian.net. So here I will say, for example, Agile bootcamp.atlassian.net. It is not used. Let's continue. Now he is going to ask me some questions in order to guide me throughout Jira. We will skip those questions because we know what we are going to do with this tool. So now let's skip this question. I can now add my friends, but I don't want to do this now. Here also he is asking me some questions in order to help me in setting up Jira. I will say skip. And now he is asking me about my project. So here we have three main types of projects, of software projects. We have Kanban project, Scrum, and bug tracking. We also have business projects, but those are out of scope of our course. So let's return to the software. Also, we have something that's called next generation template, but now we are using the classic template. So make sure that you are using the classic template. We will choose a Scrum project, and later in our course, we will explain what is Scrum and how projects are managed inside it. So like you see here, manage stories. This is our goal, to write user stories. If you don't understand, for example, any of those names, you can click on what is in this. And here he is going to explain in a very simple way what is Scrum and how work is managed inside it. But we will explain all of those things in our course. So let's click on Scrum. Let's name our project. Let's call it, for example, Demo Project 1. This is the key for the project. And then we will click create. So now I am inside my project. In the next video, we will begin to create the first user story. When you open Jira, you might be confused because of the many components inside it. We have a roadmap, a backlog, sprints, reports, issues, and components, and other things. But don't worry, we will explain all of those things together. So let's close this Jira Quick Start. The first step in our project is to open something that's called the backlog. And the backlog is like the requirements. This is the requirements of your project. So like you see here, he says plan your team's work. The backlog is your team's to-do list. Create 3 issues and rank them in order of priority. And the word issues in Jira means anything that we are going to do. So the user story in Jira, in this tool, is a type of an issue. So let's create our user story. We have the button create. Like you see, this is our project. Then the issue type. We have 4 issue types: epics, bugs, tasks, and stories. The bug is a problem in the software. If we have a problem, the tester will write a bug for the developers to solve. The task is anything that you are going to assign to your friend. The epic is a large user story. So for example, if you have a user story that should be done in 2 hours, so this is a user story. But if you have a user story that needs 40 hours of work to be implemented, in this case, this user story will be called an epic, and inside it, we will have many user stories that implement this epic. So for example, we can say that the login functionality is an epic, and inside it we have more than 1 user story. So here we have epic, we can call it login, and we say user can log into the application using many ways. Then we can write a description, we can add attachments, the reporter is me. If this epic or this issue is linked to any other issue, we can link it to it, which is the person who will begin working on this epic. The priority is highest, for example. The sprint, we didn't explain the sprint yet, and then we click on create. So this is our epic. Why isn't it here? So why don't we see this epic in our backlog? Like you see, the backlog includes 0 issues. Because the backlog includes user stories, not epics. If we click on epics here, like you see, we have the login epic and it is empty. It has 0 issues. But if we create a user story, it will appear inside the backlog. So let's return, for example, to this example. We have the login functionality, which is an epic. So here he already wrote the word epic. We have the registration epic, the login, my account. And inside the login epic, we have 3 user stories. So let's write them. The first one is logging in with email and password. The second one is logging in with Facebook. The third one is resetting the password. So here we will click again on create. The type is story and say as a user I can log in using my email and password. So this user story is inside the epic, which is called login. So if we scroll down, we have epic link, we can say login. Now I need to create another user story. I do not have to click on the create button each time I need to create a new user story. Here I can click on this checkbox, create another, and when I click it, this screen will open again in order to create another user story. So let's click on create. So here, like you see, this issue is created. As a user, I can log in using my email and password, and now I can create another user story. As a user, I can register using my Facebook account. And it is also inside the same epic, which is login. Then the last one, as a user, I can click on I can reset my password. We do not need to create another user story, so we will uncheck this button and click on create. So here, like you see, we have the backlog. It includes 3 issues, all of them inside the login epic. Each one of them has an ID, each one of them has a priority, and here we have something that's called also story points, but we will talk about it later. So let's now talk about the Scrum practices that are used in Scrum teams. The first one is called a sprint. The sprint, so Scrum divides the project into iterations or sprints of fixed length. The length of the sprint is usually 2 to 4 weeks. So for example, I have a project which has a timeline of 3 months. In this case, I can divide this project into, for example, 3 iterations or 6 iterations. And at the end of each iteration or sprint, I have a product that I can show to the customer and he can give me feedback about it. So if we return to Jira, like we see here, we have the active sprints. Here we do not have any sprint. We can start the sprint from the backlog. So in the backlog, I can click on create sprint. So now I have sprint 1, and like we see here, plan your sprint. As a team, agree on what work needs to be completed and drag these issues to the sprint. So here I can take this item and this and this. So now this is my first sprint. Of course, the backlog should include other issues, but those are, for example, the most important issues or user stories that must be done in this iteration. Then we have something that's called the product increment. So at the end of each sprint, we should have a potentially releasable or shippable product, which is called an increment. So like we see here, we build something, we measure its quality and get feedback from the customer. We learn new things and then build a new functionality. or a new build. This new build is called a product increment. Like we said in the Agile principles, working software is the primary measure of progress. So the most important thing is to have a working software that the customer can give us feedback about its quality. Then we have the product backlog. Like we saw earlier, the product owner manages a prioritized list of planned product items, and the product backlog evolves from one sprint to another, which is called backlog refinement. So for example, like we saw, we wrote a group of user stories, then we added some of them to the first sprint. At the end of the sprint, we get feedback from the customer. Based on this feedback, we begin to review our product backlog. We edit the user stories, we change in their acceptance criteria, we might also change the priority of the user stories, and this is called backlog refinement. Then we have sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog are the issues or the user stories that are chosen for development in this sprint. So here, if we return to Jira, this is the sprint backlog, the issues that are included inside our current sprint. At the start of each sprint, the Scrum team selects a set of highest priority items from the product backlog. So, like we said, the product backlog is written mainly by the product owner. But the product owner is not the person who decides which user stories will be added to the sprint backlog. No, this is the whole team. So like we see here, for example, we have a product backlog, then we have release number 1, then from release 1, we have sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, until sprint 4, and so on. In some projects, we don't have a release in the middle. We just go from product backlog to sprint backlog. It depends on the size of the project. Then we have definition of done. So like we saw earlier in the user story, we have a definition of done of the user story. Those are the tasks that when they are implemented, we can say that this user story is ready for deployment. The same with the sprint. For each sprint, we should have a definition of done. What are the tasks that must be finished in order for this sprint to reach its goal? Another important definition is time boxing. So inside your sprint, you should only add the tasks that you expect to finish within this sprint. If you are expecting that you cannot finish a task, then you should move it back to the product backlog. So how do we do time boxing? We do it using something that's called a planning poker at the beginning of the sprint. So the planning poker is an activity in which we give some points to each user story. We say, okay, this user story, is it complicated? Will it need a huge amount of testing or not? And so on. Based on this, we give this user story a number. And this number follows the Fibonacci sequence. So let's open Google and write planning poker. Images. So like you see here, for example, this is the planning poker. We have the product owner, the scrum master, the developer, the tester, all of them gather together at the beginning of the sprint, at the sprint planning meeting. They begin to read the user story with its acceptance criteria and its risks, and each one of them separately chooses a number. This number represents the complexity of this user story and the time that it will require to be implemented. If they all agree on the same number, then this is the estimate of this user story. If they don't agree, in this case, each one of them begins to explain his point of view and they try to reach a number that all of them accepts. The estimate points of the user stories mostly follow the Fibonacci sequence. So like we see here, the smallest user story has an estimate of 1. This is like, for example, contact us page. Contact us page should have an estimate of 1. Then the numbers follow Fibonacci sequence. We have 2, then 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, 5 plus 8 is 13, 8 plus 13 is 20, and so on. The best way in estimating the user story points is to stop at 20. If the user story requires more than 20 points, we can call it an epic, like we said. An epic is a large user story. So if the user story requires 40 points, this is an epic. We create an epic and begin to divide it into smaller user stories. Some people prefer this way of estimation, which follows the Fibonacci sequence and story points, and other teams prefer to estimate tasks only using time. So this user story requires 1 hour, 2 hours, and so on without using Fibonacci sequence. Both of the ways is correct. So let's see how do we estimate those user stories. If we go to Jira, like you see here, the user story has this line or this dash which is called story points. So for example, the first user story, we can scroll here, we have story points, we can say 5, this is just an estimate, then reset password, let's say that this is an easier functionality, so we will give it, for example, 2, then for example the login we can say 3. So like you see here, there is a change in our port. Here we have sprint 1, it includes 3 issues, and the estimate of this sprint is 10. So we are expecting to finish 10 story points inside this sprint. So like we said, time boxing means that we only add stories or functionalities that we can finish within the sprint. So our team might think, okay, we are not able to finish 10 story points in this iteration. Our team is only able of finishing or developing 8 story points. In this case, we might remove this user story from the sprint. So here we have an estimate of 8. The last concept in Scrum is transparency. The development team should report and update the sprint status on a daily basis at a meeting that's called the daily Scrum. So in Scrum, we have a daily Scrum meeting. It might also be called daily stand-up meeting because everyone is standing up for like 5 minutes and each one of the team members begins to explain what he did yesterday, what he is going to do today, and if he has any problems within that block his work. Now it's time to talk about Scrum. Scrum is the most important methodology that is used in Agile. So most of companies that use Agile, they mostly use Scrum also. So what is Scrum? Scrum is an Agile methodology, and inside this methodology, we have many practices. But before we explain those practices, let's first know who are the persons who are involved inside the Scrum team. We have 3 main roles in the Scrum team, which are the product owner, the Scrum master, and the development team. So the first one is the product owner. And like his name states, he is the one who owns the product. So the product owner to us as a development team is considered as the representative of the customer. If we have any questions that we want to ask the customer about, we go to the product owner. So like we see here, the product owner is accountable for maximizing the value of the product, resulting from the work of the Scrum team. The product owner is also accountable for effective product backlog management. We talked about the product backlog, in which we begin to arrange our user stories, so the product backlog is the responsibility of the product owner. He is responsible of developing and communicating the product goal, creating and clearly communicating product backlog items, ordering the product backlog items. So we wrote our user stories. Which user stories will be developed first? Which group of user stories will be used in the first iteration or the first sprint? He ensures that the product backlog is transparent, visible, and understood. Then we have the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master, like we see here, he is a leader, he is a facilitator, he is a teacher, and he is a coach. So the Scrum Master is accountable for establishing Scrum as defined in the Scrum Guide. So this person understands Scrum very well, and he makes sure that our team is following the Scrum methodology and he makes sure that our team is applying Scrum in a correct way. The Scrum Master helps everyone understand Scrum theory and practice within the Scrum team and the organization. He is also accountable for the Scrum team's effectiveness. So those are the most important 2 roles in Scrum, Scrum Master and the product owner. Also we have of course the development team, and this is the team who develops and tests the software. So now that we have created our sprint, let's start our sprint and see what happens. So I click on start sprint. Here we have the duration, like we see 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, or any custom duration. I will begin by 1 week. The sprint goal is to develop and test login functionality. Okay. And here we have 5 working days. because there are 2 off days. Let's start. So like you see, this is our Scrum board. We have 4 days remaining because today is the first day of the sprint. This is the first user story. It is in the to-do column. Let's move it to in progress. Then, for example, we finished it. Then this one, to do in progress, done. We might find some defects throughout the iteration, so the tester began to report those defects. Here is a bug. Forgot password button is not working. Okay, this defect is very important. Here, this defect is inside this sprint, which is sprint 1. It is related to the epic, which is the login functionality. Create. So now this defect is added to our iteration or our sprint. If we click on complete sprint, we finished our work. So like you see, he says that we have 2 issues were done and 1 issue was incomplete. This is not a good thing. So what do you want to do with this issue? We can move it to a new sprint or move it to the backlog. So I will move it to the backlog, click complete. Then we have something that's called the burn down chart. So what is the burn down chart? The burn down chart shows our story points. How much story points did we finish compared to how much story points did we expect to finish? So like you see, we had 8 story points at the first day of our iteration or our sprint. Then every day we finish part of them. Then we have 2 off days. Then we finish the rest of the work. So this is the expected performance of our team. But what I did is I finished everything on the first day of the iteration, and this is not a correct thing. This doesn't happen in real life. So now we can return to the backlog. Like you see, we have only 2 issues. Let's, for example, create an issue, register with Facebook, okay. Then search for items, then browse items, okay. And let's give them story points. So register, let's say, for example, 20, search, let's say 8 or 5, okay, and browse, let's give it 8 points. So now we have our user stories with their estimates. I will create another sprint, and in this sprint I will say, okay, I'm going to finish all those functionalities, okay. This is just an example. So register is 20 points. I added it, but it is not added here. Let's save it again. Oh, this is a defect in Jira, I think. Let's say 13. It's not saved. Okay, it is saved now. So let's put it back inside our iteration. So in this iteration, I'm estimating to finish 28 story points. I will start my sprint 1 week. Let's start. So here I will also finish all my tasks, but I didn't have enough time to finish the searching functionality. So I will complete the sprint without finishing this functionality. And I will move it to the backlog. So like you see, inside our burn down chart, we had around 28 story points. This is the expected behavior, but we finished part of them and we didn't finish all of them because we left the last story without developing it. Another important report that we need to see is the velocity chart. So the velocity chart, like we see here, it tracks the amount of work completed from sprint to sprint. This helps us in determining the team's velocity and estimating the work our team can realistically achieve in future sprint. So we have an important definition in Agile which is called team velocity. The team velocity is the amount of story points that our team is able of developing in each sprint. In order to understand my team velocity, I need to work on more than one iteration. So for example, this team worked with each other for 10 iterations. In this case, the team is able to know their velocity. So my team, for example, at the first week, they were committed, like we see here, to finish 8 story points, and they really finished them. The other week, they are committed to finish 28 story points, but they were only capable of completing 23 story points. And so on until we reach a stage in which we know our team velocity. This will help us in planning new sprints in the future. So when we have a new project or new functionalities added to our current project, we will be able to know the amount of work that we are capable of doing. At the end of each sprint, we should hold a meeting that's called a retrospective meeting. In this meeting, we begin to evaluate our performance throughout this sprint or this iteration in order to work in a better way in future iterations. So like we see here, a retrospective is a meeting that's held at the end of each iteration to discuss what was successful, what could be improved, and how to incorporate the improvements in future iterations. So like we see here, we can have a board like this with some sticky notes. The Scrum Master can manage something like this. And we begin to say, okay, those are the good things that we did in the previous iteration. We should continue doing them. Those are the bad things or the bad behaviors that we did in previous iteration. We should try to stop doing them. And those are good things that we didn't do in previous iterations. We should start doing them. It is very important to work step by step. So if you have, for example, 3 things like this in continue doing column, 5 things like this in stop doing column, and 2 things like this in start doing column, don't try to implement all those improvements in the next iteration. It is not a good way of improvement. The better way is to choose one thing from each column. Choose one thing that your team will try to continue doing. Choose one thing that your team will try to stop doing, and choose one thing that your team should start doing.